I didn't realize one ordinary bus ride would drag me into the most unexpected, emotional 24 hours of my life, a day that started with a stranger's kindness and ended with me finally confronting everything I'd been running from. I was on the bus this morning and the driver was already a little behind schedule. Right as he was about to pull away, he noticed an elderly woman slowly making her way toward the stop. Instead of leaving, he waited. Not just a few seconds, he waited a full 5 minutes. Other passengers started grumbling under their breath. You could feel that quiet irritation people get when their routine is disrupted by anything unexpected. But the driver just said, "That's somebody's grandma. We can wait." The woman finally got on board, thanked him, and he told her to take her time finding a seat. And the whole vibe of the bus shifted for a moment. You don't see that kind of patience very often anymore. Later, when I was trying to play a few rounds of Jackpot City on my phone, I kept thinking about that simple line, "That's somebody's grandma." It really made me realize how often we treat schedules and efficiency as if they're more important than actual people. That driver chose kindness over the clock, and it genuinely mattered. But what stuck with me wasn't just the gesture, it was the way everyone reacted afterward. The same people who had been sighing and rolling their eyes suddenly went quiet, almost embarrassed. And I found myself feeling the same way. How many times have I hurried past someone struggling with something simple? How often have I acted like time was the only thing that mattered? Way too often, if I'm being honest. I kept replaying the whole thing as the bus continued on its route. The woman, who must have been at least in her late 70s, sat across from me. Her hands were shaking slightly as she clutched her purse. When she finally looked up, our eyes met for just a second, and she gave me this tiny smile. It wasn't directed at me specifically, more like at the world, grateful, tired, gentle. And suddenly I felt this weird heaviness in my chest. Like something inside me was shifting, softening in a way I hadn't expected when I crawled out of bed this morning. Maybe it's because things have felt mechanical lately. Wake up, commute, work, come home, repeat. Talk to people without really talking. Go through motions without really being present. Everything has felt rushed, even when nothing urgent was going on. And seeing that moment of patience, genuine, unforced patience, made something inside me pause for the first time in months. As the bus moved on, I noticed the woman slowly relaxing into her seat. Her breathing evened out. She kept glancing at the driver like she wanted to say something but couldn't quite find the words. Eventually she pressed the stop button, stood up with effort, and shuffled toward the door. Before getting off, she leaned toward the driver and said, "Young man, thank you. I don't move as fast as I used to." Her voice cracked just barely, the kind of crack you only hear when someone is remembering something painful or precious. He only nodded and said, "Take care of yourself today." And then she stepped off into the sunlight. The bus stayed silent for a while. Not the irritated silence from before. A different kind. A reflective one. It was like everyone was processing the same unspoken thought, we could be better. Kinder. Less obsessed with time, more aware of each other. By the time I got off, my entire mood had changed. I felt calmer than I had in days. Maybe weeks. I walked slower. I breathed deeper. It sounds ridiculous to say a 5-minute delay on public transport changed anything, but it did. It opened something small but important in my mind, a realization that kindness still exists in the world, but it's quiet. So quiet that most days we rush right past it. On my way to work I kept seeing small things I wouldn't normally notice. A man holding the door for a stranger. A kid picking up a glove someone had dropped. A woman pausing to let a cyclist pass instead of stepping in front of them like most pedestrians do. Nothing dramatic, nothing story-worthy, yet suddenly meaningful. I don't really know why that morning hit me the way it did. Maybe because I've been feeling disconnected lately. Maybe because everything feels fast and pressured and transactional. Or maybe because I've been missing that softness, the reminder that we're all just people trying to get somewhere. Trying to manage our own struggles, our own pace, our own fears. That's somebody's grandma. The line keeps echoing in my mind. Not because it's clever or deep, but because it's simple. It reminds me that every stranger is important to someone. And that patience, the kind we rarely have time for, is sometimes the most meaningful thing we can give. I don't know if this realization will change my life in some dramatic way. Probably not. But it changed my day. And sometimes that's enough of a start. For the rest of the morning, I kept drifting back to that moment on the bus. It wasn't just the kindness itself, but the contrast, the way it cut through the usual cold hurry of the city. I carried that feeling with me into the office, thinking maybe I'd hold on to it long enough to make the day slightly less unbearable. But the office doesn't really allow for quiet revelations. The moment the elevator doors opened, the usual chaos swallowed me whole. People rushing around with half-finished coffees, someone loudly complaining about the printer jamming again, the same recycled air that always smelled faintly like burnt paper and cheap hand sanitizer. I forced a smile at the receptionist and made my way to my desk, already feeling the old rhythm settle back into my bones. Deadlines, messages, reminders, expectations. All the little things that chip away at you without asking permission. I hadn't even taken my jacket off when my manager appeared beside me. She had that overly bright, professional smile that somehow always felt like a warning. "Hey. Glad you're here early. We need to talk about the client presentation." Translation: something went wrong and you're the lucky volunteer who gets to fix it. I followed her into a meeting room where she explained that one of the files had been corrupted, which meant a huge chunk of my work was missing. She wasn't accusing me exactly, but the disappointment in her voice was unmistakable. I felt a warm flush of frustration creeping up my neck, but I kept nodding like everything was fine. Inside, though, I was trying to cling to the memory of the bus driver's calm, patient voice. "We can wait." But there was no waiting here. No space for it. Only pressure. After the meeting, I sat at my desk staring at the blank parts of the project I now had to rebuild from scratch. Hours of work, gone. And no one cared if I was tired or overwhelmed, they just wanted it done. I felt that heaviness return, the same one I'd had when I woke up. It was like the morning kindness had evaporated the moment I stepped into this fluorescent-lit world. Around noon, I decided to take a short break. I walked outside, needing air, needing something real. I sat on a bench across the street, watching people hurry past, phones in their hands, eyes unfocused. For a moment I wondered if any of them had witnessed something gentle that morning, a kind word, a small gesture, or if they were all drowning in their own silent rush like I usually was. I pulled out my phone and opened my messages without thinking. There was nothing new. Not a single text from anyone I actually cared about. The loneliness washed over me so quickly it almost startled me. How long had it been since someone reached out just to check on me? How long had it been since I reached out to anyone? I kept scrolling through old conversations, most of them dead threads filled with half-hearted plans that never happened. And then, somewhere far down the list, I found a chat that stopped me cold. Someone I hadn't spoken to in almost a year. Someone who used to know me better than anyone. The last message was from me, something short and stupid, the end of a conversation that should never have ended the way it did. I stared at the chat for a long time, thumb hovering over the keyboard. What would I even say? Hey, I saw a bus driver be nice to someone and it made me realize I'm falling apart inside, hope you're good. Yeah, no. That wasn't happening. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized the real reason I didn't want to message them. It wasn't pride or awkwardness. It was fear. Fear that they wouldn't respond. Fear that they would, and all the old emotions would come rushing back. Fear that I'd be reminded of the version of myself I used to be, the one who believed people would always stay if you loved them enough. The one who hadn't yet learned how easily life can hollow you out when people walk away. I locked my phone and leaned back, closing my eyes. And then I heard a voice. A familiar one, but it took my brain a second to place it. Are you okay? I opened my eyes, and there he was, a coworker I barely talked to outside of polite morning greetings. He was holding a sandwich in one hand, concern in his expression that I definitely didn't expect. Yeah, I lied automatically. Just needed some air. He hesitated, then sat on the other end of the bench. You look. I don't know. Tired. Everything all right? Something about the way he said it made me pause. It wasn't intrusive. It wasn't performative. It sounded like he actually cared. And that threw me off completely. I didn't know how to respond, because honesty felt too heavy and lying felt suddenly exhausting. So I said the closest thing to the truth I could manage. It's just been a weird day. He nodded like he understood exactly what that meant. Yeah. I get those. More often than I should. We sat there in a brief, strangely comforting silence. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I had to present a version of myself. I didn't have to smile or be productive or pretend everything was fine. I could just exist. And that small bit of space felt more valuable than anything else that day. Eventually he stood up, dusting off his hands. If you need anything, he said softly, even just someone to eat lunch with. I'm around. I watched him walk away, unsure how to process the sudden warmth in my chest. It wasn't anything romantic or dramatic. It was just human kindness. Another small example, just like the bus driver earlier. 2 moments in one day that made me feel seen in ways I hadn't felt in months. Maybe that's what today was trying to teach me. That kindness doesn't always come from the people you expect. And sometimes the smallest gestures reveal how deeply you've been missing something without even realizing it. By the time I returned to my desk, something inside me had shifted. Not dramatically. Not enough to fix everything. But enough to make me breathe a little easier. Enough to make me think. Maybe I'm not as alone as I keep telling myself. The rest of the afternoon crawled by in that slow, suffocating way only office hours can. I tried focusing on rebuilding the corrupted files, but my mind kept drifting back to the bench, to the unexpected gentleness in my coworker's voice. It was strange how much that brief moment affected me. I couldn't remember the last time someone looked at me and actually saw something beneath the surface. By the time I finished salvaging most of the work, my eyes were burning, and my shoulders felt like they were made of stone. I shut down my computer and headed for the exit, moving on autopilot, just wanting to get home and disappear into my usual evening routine. But as I walked toward the bus stop, I couldn't shake the feeling that today was different. It wasn't a big shift, more like a subtle crack in the shell I'd wrapped around myself for too long. At the stop, a group of teenagers were talking loudly, laughing, shoving each other around. Normally, I would have found them annoying, but now I couldn't help watching them with a weird mix of envy and curiosity. They seemed so unguarded, so unbothered by the weight of the world. I wondered when I had stopped being like that. When everything had turned into a constant series of calculations, what to say, how to act, what to hide, what version of myself to present depending on who I was with. The bus arrived and I took a seat near the back. The same route, the same stops, but today everything felt slightly shifted out of alignment. I pulled out my phone and opened the chat I'd been avoiding. The one with the person I hadn't spoken to in almost a year. My thumb hovered over the screen again, and just like before, fear wrapped itself around my chest. But this time I didn't lock the phone right away. I opened the chat completely. Scrolling up through our last messages. There were jokes, small confessions, late-night rambles, things we used to tell each other without thinking twice. And then the slow fade out, the kind where neither person officially ends things, but the silence grows until it becomes the only thing left. I hadn't realized how much that silence had hurt me until now. Without fully deciding to do it, I started typing. Hey. I hope you're doing okay. Simple. Safe. Not too vulnerable. But I couldn't bring myself to hit send. My chest tightened as I imagined every possible outcome, them ignoring it, them responding coldly, them responding too warmly. Every option felt like a risk I wasn't ready for. I deleted the message and stared out the window instead, watching the city blur by. My reflection in the glass looked tired, older than I expected. Maybe that's what got to me the most. How much of my life had slipped by without me noticing? How much of myself had I buried under routine and survival and emotional autopilot? A notification buzzed, making me jump. But it wasn't them. It was the coworker from earlier, the one who'd sat with me on the bench. I didn't even remember giving him my number, but there it was. Hope your afternoon went better. It was such a small thing, but it made something warm flicker in my chest. I typed back a quick message, nothing too personal, just a thank you. But it felt different from the empty exchanges I was used to. It felt real. Like a seed planted in soil I hadn't watered in a long time. When I got home, the apartment felt too quiet again, but not as oppressive as usual. I changed into something comfortable and heated up leftovers. The motions were familiar, automatic, but my mind felt anything but calm. I kept thinking about the bus driver, the bench conversation, the old friend I couldn't bring myself to message. All of it swirled together into this uncomfortable but necessary awareness. I had isolated myself more than I realized. Not intentionally. It just happened slowly, like a dimmer switch being turned down one notch at a time until I forgot the room used to be brighter. I sat on the couch, food untouched, and let myself acknowledge something I had been avoiding for months. Maybe longer. I wasn't just tired. I was lonely. Not the dramatic, heartbreak kind of lonely. Not the cinematic version where someone cries out a window and the rain conveniently starts pouring. No, it was quieter. A persistent ache somewhere deep inside. The kind you don't notice until the moment it becomes impossible to ignore. And it scared me. Because loneliness is the sort of thing that sneaks up on you, settles into your bones, and convinces you that reaching out isn't worth the risk. That people will always leave. That being self-contained is safer. That expecting anything from anyone is asking for disappointment. I had been living in that mindset for so long that I didn't even realize how much it shaped every decision I made. But today, just today, something cracked through it. A bus driver who waited. A coworker who cared. A message I almost sent. And as I sat there, staring at the dim lights of my living room, I felt a quiet shift inside me. Not a revelation. Not a breakthrough. Just a willingness. A tiny, fragile willingness to consider that maybe I didn't have to keep living like this. I picked up my phone again, opened the old chat, and stared at the blank message box. My heart was pounding, but this time I didn't delete the words as fast as they appeared. This time I let myself sit with the possibility that reaching out, truly reaching out, might not end in disaster. And for the first time in a long time, the idea didn't feel terrifying. It felt like hope. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, my mind wandered back to that unsent message sitting in the empty chat window. It felt like a door I kept approaching but couldn't bring myself to open. Around 2 a.m., I gave up on sleep entirely and sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the faint city lights bleeding through the curtains. The quiet felt heavier than usual, like the whole room was holding its breath along with me. I kept thinking about how small choices ripple outward. A bus driver waits 5 minutes, and my entire day spirals into a series of realizations I've been avoiding for years. A coworker asks if I'm okay, and suddenly I feel something I haven't felt in a long time, connection. And then there was this old friend, whose absence carved out a space inside me I pretended wasn't there. A space I never filled, no matter how many routines I built to distract myself. By morning, I had made a decision. I would send the message, not necessarily to rekindle the friendship, not to fix the past, but simply because I didn't want fear to keep deciding everything for me. I typed out a simple, honest line. Hey. I've been thinking about you lately. I hope you're doing alright. Before I had a chance to rethink it, I hit send. It felt like stepping off a ledge, that split second of weightlessness where you can't tell yet if it was the right move or a huge mistake. My stomach twisted as I waited for the read receipt to appear, but it didn't. Minutes passed. Then half an hour. Then an hour. Nothing. I told myself not to obsess about it, but of course I did. I forced myself to focus on getting ready for work. I put on music, louder than usual, just to drown out the sound of my own thoughts. I caught the bus, not the same driver as yesterday, and stared out the window the entire ride, feeling a strange mixture of tension and relief. I had reached out. That alone felt like progress. Even if they never replied. When I arrived at the office, I noticed my coworker, the one who'd sat with me on the bench, standing by the entrance with a coffee in each hand. He looked up just as I approached and gave me a small smile. I guessed you might need this today, he said, offering me one of the cups. I froze for a moment, taken aback. No one had bought me coffee in. I couldn't even remember how long. I accepted it with a quiet, thank you, unsure how else to respond without sounding overly sentimental. Rough morning, he asked. I shrugged. Just didn't sleep much. He nodded, not pushing for more, which I appreciated. Then he added, if you want to talk about it later, I'm around. No pressure. It was such a simple offer, but it landed heavier than he probably realized. All day, his kindness hovered in the back of my mind, softening the edges of my usual stress. The workday felt less suffocating, the office noise less grating. Even the endless emails felt less like a personal attack from the universe. Everything was lighter. But the real shift happened during lunch. I stepped outside again, instinctively gravitating toward the bench where we'd sat the day before. I wasn't expecting him to join me, but after a few minutes he appeared, carrying his lunch and an extra bottle of water he placed beside me. "I figured you forgot to bring any," he said with a small laugh. And he was right. I had. We talked about nothing at first: the weather, annoying coworkers, the weird smell in the elevator that everyone pretended not to notice. But eventually the conversation drifted back toward the morning. "You seem thoughtful," he said, searching for the right word. "That's one way to put it," I replied, staring down at my hands. "I reached out to someone today. Someone I haven't talked to in a long time." He didn't ask who. He didn't ask why. He just nodded, giving me space to continue. "It was harder than I expected," I admitted. "I've been putting it off for months." "Sometimes the hardest things aren't big," he said quietly. "They're just honest." Something about that sentence made my chest tighten. Honest. Maybe that was the word I'd been avoiding. I had spent so much time hiding behind routines and empty conversations that honesty felt dangerous. But maybe it was exactly what I needed. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, and for the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel heavy. When I returned to my desk after lunch, I finally saw it, a notification on my phone. My heart lurched. It was from them. My old friend. The message was short, but it hit me with the force of a wave I wasn't prepared for. "Hey. I've been thinking about you too." I stared at those words for so long my vision blurred. A flood of emotions crashed through me: relief, confusion, regret, a strange warmth I wasn't ready to examine too closely. My hands trembled as I set the phone down, because I knew that message wasn't just a response. It was an opening. A door cracked slightly ajar. A chance for something I had quietly mourned for months without admitting it to myself. My coworker glanced over from his desk, noticing the way I froze. "You okay?" he mouthed silently. I nodded, but my mind was miles away. Everything felt like it was shifting again: the ground beneath me, the air around me, the space inside my chest I pretended was empty. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know what I wanted to happen next. But for the first time in a very long time, I felt something I had almost forgotten how to feel. Possibility. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. I kept trying to focus on my tasks, but my mind kept drifting back to that message. "I've been thinking about you too." It replayed in my head on loop, soft but overwhelming, like a song I wasn't ready to stop listening to. It felt like someone had reached through a wall I didn't even realize I'd built. But along with the warmth came something else: fear. Not the sharp, panicked kind, but something deeper. A slow, creeping worry that I was letting myself hope for something that might not actually exist anymore. I didn't know who they were now. I didn't even know if I was the same person they remembered. Maybe we both had changed too much. I typed a reply several times and erased it just as quickly. Everything felt too careful or too vulnerable or too stiff. I didn't want to sound desperate. I didn't want to sound indifferent either. Eventually I settled on something simple. "It's really good to hear from you." I wasn't sure if you'd respond. I hovered over the send button, heart pounding, until I forced myself to hit it. There was no going back now. A few minutes later, another message appeared. I wasn't sure if I should. "It's been a long time." My breath caught. Something about that line unsettled me, like it hinted at a weight I didn't fully understand. Maybe they were hesitant. Maybe they were angry. Maybe they were hurting too. I wanted to ask 100 questions, but before I could type anything, my manager called me over to discuss yet another last-minute change. I shoved my phone into my pocket and tried to focus. By the time I sat back at my desk, several more notifications were waiting for me. I didn't reach out before because I didn't know what to say. "I wasn't sure how you felt. I thought maybe you'd moved on, or you didn't want me in your life anymore." Reading those words hurt in a way I didn't expect. I had spent months convincing myself I was the only one who felt abandoned. I never considered the possibility that maybe they were hurting too, hiding it behind silence, just like I had. I typed my response with trembling fingers. "I never stopped wanting you in my life." I was just scared to admit it. I hesitated before sending it, feeling exposed in a way that made my ribs tighten. But I sent it anyway. If today had taught me anything, it was that honesty wouldn't kill me, even if it scared me. This time, the reply came almost instantly. "Then maybe, we should talk." My heartbeat quickened. Talk. That could mean anything: fixing things, closure, reopening wounds, or opening doors we'd both locked a long time ago. I wasn't sure what I wanted it to mean yet. My coworker glanced over again, noticing the way I froze with my phone in hand. "You look like you just got hit by a bus," he said quietly, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Not far off," I muttered. He leaned back in his chair, watching me for a moment. "If you need to step out, do it. The work will still be here." It wasn't permission exactly. More like understanding. And that was enough to get me moving. I grabbed my jacket and headed down to the lobby, then outside. The cold air slapped me in the face, grounding me. I took a deep breath and dialed the number I wasn't sure I'd ever call again. It rang once. Twice. 3 times. Each ring felt like it was stretching the moment further and further until I wasn't sure my lungs remembered how to function. Then I heard their voice. "Hello?" I hadn't heard that voice in months. But some part of me recognized it instantly. Soft. Cautious. Familiar in a way that felt like stepping into an old room and finding everything exactly where you left it, even though you were certain it would all be gone. "Hey," I said, barely above a whisper. There was a pause, long enough for doubt to creep in, but not long enough to break me. I'm glad you called, they said finally. We talked for a while, at first stumbling over small talk, fumbling through polite questions. It felt awkward, like trying to reassemble something you once knew by heart. But slowly the stiffness faded, and we fell into familiar rhythms, half-finished sentences the other person understood, jokes only we would laugh at, little memories we'd forgotten until now. And then, somewhere in the middle of the conversation, their tone changed. I need to tell you something, they said softly. And I don't know how you're going to take it. My stomach tightened. This was the kind of sentence that always preceded something big, something that could shift everything. Go ahead, I said, even though my voice shook. There was silence on the other end, the kind that pressed against my chest until I felt almost dizzy. When we stopped talking, they began slowly. It wasn't because I wanted to. It was because I couldn't. Something happened. Something I didn't know how to tell you. The world narrowed. My heartbeat pounded so loudly I almost didn't hear the rest. I didn't disappear because I didn't care. I disappeared because I was falling apart. My breath hitched. Pain, guilt, fear, everything tangled together inside me, leaving me unable to speak. I wanted to reach out, they continued, but I didn't want to drag you into my mess. I thought I was protecting you. 1,000 thoughts crashed through me. Hurt, relief, confusion. But one thing cut through all of it, the realization that our silence wasn't one-sided after all. And right then, I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to before. This wasn't just a reconnection. It wasn't just nostalgia. It wasn't just loneliness. This was the beginning of something complicated, something that could heal us or break us again. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure which one I feared more. For a moment, I couldn't say anything. Their voice on the other end trembled just slightly, the kind of tremble you only hear when someone is speaking from a wound they've been hiding for too long. I felt the cold seeping through my jacket as I stood outside the office building, the noise of traffic fading into a dull hum behind the pounding of my heartbeat. I didn't know, I finally said, my voice barely more than a whisper. I know, they replied. I didn't let you know. And I'm sorry for that. I didn't want you to see me like that. That hit me harder than anything else. Not the absence, not the silence, but the idea that they believed I wouldn't stay if things got messy. That they thought I only wanted the parts of them that were easy. What happened? I asked gently. There was a long pause before they answered. Everything. My family, my mental health, work, it all collapsed at once. I felt like I was suffocating. And instead of asking for help, I just shut down. From everyone. Including you. Their voice cracked on the last word, and something inside me cracked with it. I pressed my free hand against my forehead, trying to steady myself. All those months I spent thinking they didn't care, when the truth was much more complicated. Much more human. I wish you had told me, I said, an edge of pain in my voice that I couldn't hide. I know. I wanted to. I wrote messages I never sent. I kept checking your profile, saw you posting, saw you online, and I kept thinking, they're doing fine. They don't need me dragging them down. So I stayed quiet. A strange mix of anger and sadness washed over me. Not anger at them, never at them, but at the situation, at the timing, at the way life can twist connections until they snap under their own weight. I wasn't fine, I said quietly. Not even close. I figured that out too late, they said. By the time I finally tried to reach out, I didn't know if I had the right. I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding since the day they went silent. The heaviness in my chest pulsed with something I hadn't felt in a long time, the ache of wanting someone who felt just out of reach. You always had the right, I said. Even when it didn't feel like it. They didn't respond right away, and the silence stretched between us, not empty, but charged. A fragile bridge between two people who had spent too long standing on opposite sides of the same unspoken hurt. Then they said something I didn't expect. I want to see you. My heart lurched violently. I wasn't prepared for that. A call was one thing. Messages were one thing. But seeing each other, after everything, felt like stepping into a storm I wasn't sure I was ready for. When? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. Soon, they said. But only if you want to. Do I want to? The question ricocheted through my mind, colliding with a dozen tangled emotions. Did I want closure? Did I want answers? Did I want to rebuild something we barely recognized anymore? Or did I want them? Just them, flawed, hurting, complicated, the person I had missed in ways I'd never admitted. I don't know, I said honestly. I want to. I'm just scared. I'm scared too, they whispered. But I don't want fear to make the decision this time. That line hit me like a punch to the chest. Because fear had made the decision last time. For both of us. Fear of vulnerability, fear of being a burden, fear of wanting too much. And here we were again, standing at the same crossroads, except now, we both knew what avoidance cost us. Then they asked the question I didn't know how to answer. Are you ready to talk about everything? Really talk? I closed my eyes. The cold wind brushed against my face, grounding me just enough to think. Was I ready? No, not really. Did I want to be ready? Yes. More than I wanted to admit. I can try, I said. That's all I can promise. That's enough, they said softly. We stayed on the phone for a while longer, not talking as much as just existing together, like the silence between us wasn't something to fear anymore. Eventually, they said they had to go, but before the call ended, they added. I'm glad you reached out. More than you know. When the call clicked off, I sat down on the cold concrete steps outside the office, staring at my reflection in the building's glass doors. I didn't recognize the expression on my own face. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't relief. It was something raw and fragile, something dangerously close to hope. But with that hope came uncertainty. Old wounds don't heal cleanly. Old connections don't reconnect without friction. And I knew that seeing them again, whenever that happened, would reopen things I'd worked hard to bury. I also knew I wanted to face it anyway. But as I stood up to go back inside, my phone buzzed again, not from them. From my coworker. "You doing all right? You disappeared for a bit." And suddenly, the weight of everything hit me all at once. Two different people. Two different kinds of connection. Two different versions of myself reflected back at me. And in that moment, I realized. I wasn't just deciding whether to reopen the past. I was choosing who I wanted to be moving forward. And that choice was going to change everything. I walked home that evening slower than usual, letting the cold air sting my cheeks just enough to keep me grounded. My phone stayed heavy in my pocket, the two most recent messages, one from the past, one from the present, feeling like two different versions of my life pulling me in opposite directions. I didn't answer either of them right away. I needed space. I needed clarity. I needed to step out of the noise long enough to figure out what the hell I truly wanted. By the time I got inside my apartment, the sky had darkened completely. I didn't turn on the lights. I dropped my bag on the floor and sank onto the couch, letting the quiet settle around me like a blanket I wasn't sure I wanted. The city hummed faintly outside the window, but inside it was just me, and the echo of everything that had happened over the last 24 hours. It was strange. Almost surreal. Yesterday, my life felt like a straight, narrow hallway with no doors, no choices, no light. Just routine. Wake up, work, exist. And somehow, in the span of one day, the hallway had cracked open. Not in a dramatic way, not with fireworks or revelations, just small, human moments. A bus driver waiting. A coworker caring. A voice from my past returning with both apology and vulnerability. It was enough to make me realize how desperately I'd been craving connection, real connection, without even admitting it. I leaned back and closed my eyes. The conversation from earlier replayed in my mind. Their voice trembling when they said they disappeared because they were falling apart. My own voice shaking when I admitted I had never stopped wanting them in my life. The offer to see each other. The fear. The hope. All of it collided inside me until I felt like my ribs couldn't hold it anymore. I sat up suddenly, overwhelmed by the need to breathe properly. I stood by the window, watching the reflections of passing cars stretch across the glass. It felt like the city kept moving even when I couldn't. And then, quietly, the truth began to form, not as a dramatic realization, but as a gentle shift inside me. I wasn't choosing between two people. I was choosing between two versions of myself. One version, the old one, wanted to go back, to reconnect with the person I used to be, the person who believed friendships could survive anything. The version that missed them so deeply it became part of my loneliness. The other version, the one shaped by today, wanted something new. Not necessarily romantic or dramatic or life-changing. Just new. A connection built not on memory or nostalgia, but on what I was becoming. Both were honest. Both were real. But only one of them felt like it let me breathe. I sat back down slowly and reached for my phone. Two unread messages stared back at me. I opened the one from my coworker first. "You doing all right? You disappeared for a bit. Just checking in." I read it twice, feeling that same gentle warmth spread through my chest. No expectations. No pressure. Just genuine concern. A small thing, but small things had carried me through today. I typed a reply. "Yeah. Just needed some air. Thank you for asking. Really." I hit send without doubting myself. It felt easy. Natural. Honest. Then I opened the other chat, the older one. The one full of ghosts and unanswered questions. Their last message hovered at the bottom. "Then maybe, we should talk in person." My fingers hovered over the keyboard. And for the first time, the answer felt clear. I typed slowly, carefully. "I want to talk. I want closure. But I don't want to go back. I think we both hurt too much trying to hold on to who we used to be. Maybe it's time we forgive each other, and let that be enough." I read it again. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't final in the harsh way endings usually are. It was honest. And for the first time in a long time, honesty felt freeing instead of terrifying. I pressed send. The screen dimmed after a moment, and I let the quiet settle again. A knot in my chest loosened. Not completely, old wounds never vanish instantly, but enough for me to breathe deeper than I had all week. All month. Maybe all year. A few minutes later, their reply came. "I understand. And I'm glad you told me. I hope you find what makes you feel whole again. Truly." I stared at the words, letting them sink in. There was sadness there, yes, a soft, familiar ache, but there was something else too. Acceptance. Release. The kind of ending where no one is the villain, and no one is the hero. Just two people who grew in different directions. I set the phone down and finally turned on the lights. The room looked different somehow. Not brighter, but clearer. Like the shadows had shifted into their proper places. Later that night, as I was making tea, another message buzzed on my phone. From my coworker. "If you ever want to talk, or not talk, just sit outside again, I'm around. No rush. Just, offering." I didn't feel pressure. I didn't feel fear. I felt something warm, quiet, and steady. Possibility. But this time, one rooted in the present, not the past. I typed back. Maybe tomorrow. I think I'd like that. I set the phone down and exhaled slowly, feeling something in my chest settle for the first time in a very long while. Not because everything was fixed. Not because the loneliness vanished. Not because a new chapter magically began. But because I finally chose myself. Not the version shaped by regret. Not the version shaped by fear. The version shaped by hope, however small, however quiet. And as I sipped my tea and let the warmth spread through me, I realized something simple and profound. Sometimes the biggest change begins with the smallest kindness. Sometimes the smallest kindness comes from a stranger. And sometimes, if you're lucky, it starts to rebuild the parts of you thought were gone forever. I wasn't done healing. I wasn't done growing. But I wasn't alone anymore either. And for now, that was enough.